Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com. Excuse me. And I'm here with our DraftKings tight end picks for week 2. Now, if you guys haven't noticed, the tight end pricing on DraftKings has been very, very soft. And that's the reason why the top roster last week was able to include 2 tight ends in it, because a lot of these guys are very cheap based on the production that they're able to give you. We're going to go over the tight ends today in 3 tiers. The first tier, you guys will see in a second. The second tier is going to be the guys between 4,000 and 5,000, and the third tier is going to be the guys that are 4,000 and below. Now, the first tier, the reason why I didn't name the first tier when I said it is because the first tier is going to be called the Gronk tier. And that's because Rob Gronkowski is playing and available in the pools on Sunday this week. So he's going to be one of the top options that's out there. Now, let's face it, this guy is the best tight end in the league by a large margin. And when you look at using a guy like Gronk, what you really have to do is say, what do I get at a running back or a wide receiver position for the same amount of money that I would be using to get Gronk instead? You have to look at the guy that you're going to use at that position, which is usually going to be a cheap option in order to fit Gronk in, and say, do I get more points by using Gronk and player X than I'm going to get by using the expensive running back or the expensive wide receiver that you would use and one of the cheap tight ends? Now, the safety that Gronk brings is the fact that he's a big red zone target. He's the tight end that gets the most targets of any other tight end in the league. And he's a big part of that offense, whether it's between the 20s or in the red zone. He's a guy that can stretch a defense down the seam. He's a guy that can make a catch and get some yards after the catch, whether that be by outrunning people or running them over. There's a lot of things that he brings to the table as a tight end that you really want in your lineup. Now, this week, his price is $7,300. Now, I don't expect him to have another 3-touchdown game like he did last time. But again, he is the main threat when they do get into the red zone. One of the things we always talk about with guys that we're looking for as red zone targets is guys that are big and strong. Guys that are big and strong are able to use their body to get position and to make plays. Gronk has the athletic ability to go up and catch a ball if they throw a fade to him. He also has the strength and the body control to be able to go down, kind of post up like a basketball player does, and get himself in good position to make a play in the end zone. So Gronk is definitely one of the top options. I'm not going to argue with anybody who decides to use him. He's a great cash game play, somebody who you can count on for the safety of getting you some points. He always makes a couple catches, always winds up with a couple yards, and just about every game he gets at least 1 or 2 red zone looks. So obviously, if you decide that you want to pay up at the position, he is about $2,000 more expensive than any other option we're going to talk about today. But the way that he plays and the safety that he gives you, he's well worth it in your cash games. Now, in your tournaments, I do think that you want to try to find one of these cheaper guys who can have a big game for you. Last week was a huge week for tight ends. We had, 4 or 5 of them that put up 25 or more points. And a couple of those, a couple of those names are the guys that we're going to mention here. The first one is going to be Austin Seferian-Jenkins. He had a great first game, lived up to all the hype from the preseason about him. Him and Winston seem to have a pretty good connection. Winston seems to like to look for him. And I mean, this is a big guy who's athletic, has good hands. He can run. There's a lot of positives to using a guy like Jenkins. I do think that Tampa Bay is going to be down in this game as well. So I do think they're going to be passing late. And in the last game in garbage time, Jenkins really racked up a bunch of catches and a bunch of yards. So even if he doesn't have a big start to this game, I think later on in the game when Tampa Bay is forced to throw the ball to come from behind, I think Jenkins is going to be able to rack up some catches for you. Now, again, he's only $4,100 this week, which is really, really cheap for a guy that can get you 6 to 8 catches. If he gets you 6 to 8 catches, that's basically 2 points per 1,000 right there, not even including the receiving yards and any touchdowns that he might get. So not only does he have a pretty safe floor, but he also has a pretty high upside today. And I definitely think he's somebody you should look at to include in your rosters. Now, a guy who I know is going to be very popular that's $100 more is going to be Tyler Eifert. I was a little bit shocked at how athletic he was. Had a huge game in the first week, but I think a lot of that had to do with the game plan. They decided to bracket A.J. Green, basically leaving a safety over the top to almost double team him on every play. That left a lot of room in the middle and a lot of room underneath for Eifert, who kept getting matched up with linebackers. Now, he was able to stretch the defense down the seam by getting behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties. He was able to make some of those button hook and crossing catches that we usually like to see out of the tight end. And like I said, he was even able to go up in the red zone. He had a couple red zone looks had one touchdown on a slant in the red zone, had another one on kind of a fade in the red zone where he went and showed off his athleticism by literally jumping over the defensive back and coming down with the ball. So I do think that this is a guy that is for real. I think he's going to be somebody that we want to look at a lot this season. But I also think that Cincinnati is going to have kind of a run-heavy plan of attack here this week. So in a run-heavy plan of attack, he might not see as many targets as he did last week. Although last week they were pretty run-heavy too. They were up about 4 touchdowns at one point during that game. So I do still think he has some merit and is a guy you can look at. But I don't know if I love him this week, especially in tournaments where I think a lot of people are going to be on him after the big week he had last week. I think he's better used in cash games. I do think he will see some targets. And again, at only 4,200, you don't need a lot out of him in order for him to make value. The next guy I want to talk about is going to be Jason Witten. Now, we all know that Des Bryant is out. Some reports say as long as 8 to 12 weeks. And I think that means that Witten is going to have to be more involved in the passing game. We saw him come up with 2 touchdowns in the opener, and we saw him be a big part of that final drive when Des Bryant was already out of the game to bring Dallas back and get that victory over the New York Giants in week 1. Witten is only 4,300. Excuse me. He's only 4,300 this week, and I think he could wind up with half a dozen catches and 60 yards pretty easily, which would return decent value. If he's able to get a touchdown as well, he would be a great value on a day and is another guy that you should look at. I think there's a lot of value at this tight end position. And like I said before, I think there is some merit in using 2 tight ends on your rosters in order to pay up and fit some of the big studs that you want to get in there. Another guy who I really like is Greg Olsen. Now, I understand that Olsen didn't have a great first week, but that only makes sure that his ownership percentage stays lower because a lot of people have the recency bias of thinking that, oh, this guy screwed me last week, I'm not going to put him in my lineup. But he has a much better situation this time around. Again, we know that he's the top pass catcher left on that Panthers team. They got guys like Jericho Cotchery, Ted Ginn, Philly Brown on the outside. Those guys aren't really going to be scaring anybody. The Carolina team is going to try to run the ball as much as they can, but if they do get down in this game, which I think is a possibility, they're going to have to be throwing the ball late, and I think we're going to see a lot more targets go Olsen's way. Olsen was another guy last week who was a victim of game plan as the defensive coordinators tried to bracket him as often as possible, knowing that he was Cam's favorite target that was healthy and available. I think this week he'll find a little bit more room to run, and I think he should have a bigger game. Now, the thing that scares me is his price is a little bit expensive. He's almost $5,000, and not that that's a huge price, but there are guys in the $3,000 and $4,000 range who I like just as much that I think could have more upside and have a safer floor because they need less points altogether. You probably need about 15 to 20 points out of a guy like Olsen, which he is definitely capable of doing, but it's not as easy as a guy who's priced at 3,000 or 4,000 that probably only needs 10 to 12 points in order to pay off his value. Moving down to that $3,000 range, I really like Jordan Reed again from the Washington Redskins. He's 3,700. He had a whole bunch of targets last week. I think he wound up with 11 of them, had 7 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. So that's 19 points altogether for a guy that's under $4,000. If you can get a 5-point per $1,000, of course, return on your tight end, that's going to be a great value play. And I think Jordan Reed is in line to do something similar to that this week. Even if he doesn't get the touchdown, he's still going to wind up with somewhere between 10 and 15 points, which is going to be enough to pay off a salary of $3,700. Another guy I really like is Ladarius Green. That San Diego passing attack looked great last week. The thing that gives me a little bit of pause with Green is that you know that Rivers is going to spread the ball around. Everybody gets a couple touches, unless your name is Keenan Allen, and then you get a ton of touches. But everybody else is going to see somewhere between 5 and 8 targets, have a chance for somewhere between 4 and 6 catches, 40 or 60 yards. And Ladarius Green is also a big, strong target, so he will see some red zone looks as well. Although it looked like San Diego was going to try to pound the ball or throw some quick sneak passes out of the backfield to Danny Woodhead when they get down within scoring range. So I don't know if we're going to see a ton of targets in the red zone for Green, but he is one of the better big-time, big, strong options that they have for red zone looks when they do get down there. His price at only $3,500 means that you really only need about 10 to 12 points out of him, and I think he's going to be able to do that. He should wind up with somewhere between 4 and 6 catches, 40 or 50 yards, and he does have a good chance for a touchdown this week as well. If you want to go really, really cheap, Vernon Davis is only $3,000 this week. Now, that San Francisco team really relied on the run and pounded the rock on the ground last week, but Davis was the guy who led the team in basically every pass-catching category. had the most receptions, had the most targets. I think he even had the most yards out of any of the receivers that they had on the roster. Now, again, San Francisco did not need to throw in that first game, so they didn't throw the ball much. I think they will need to throw here. I think there's a good chance they may be behind and having to catch up in this game. And I think that Vernon Davis is going to be the top target this year for a guy like Kaepernick. He's completely healthy. He's off of his injury. He looks really good. And I think he's somebody who could come down with 4 or 5 catches, which isn't even asking a lot for him. But if he gets 4 or 5 catches for 40 or 50 yards, he's going to get you 10 points. So at $3,000, that's pretty good value. And if he does wind up getting a touchdown for you, he could wind up with 16 to 20 points, which would be great value for a guy that you only have to pay $3,000 for at the position. So those are some of my top tight end targets for the week. Those are the guys that I like best. There are a couple other guys like a Jimmy Graham, who I think is in play. Martellus Bennett is another guy that you can look at. Jared Cook, the tight end from St. Louis. Jordan Cameron from Miami. Maybe even a Heath Miller right now with how many people they're missing on that Pittsburgh team. And Eric Ebron, who had a nice touchdown stretching the seam down the middle. Those are other options that you can consider as well. But the guys who we talked about, the guys up top, are the guys that I'm looking at most. If you're not putting Gronk in your roster, I think that you're probably doing it wrong for cash games. But I do think that you can look at some of these really, really cheap options in your GPP contest. I do think some of these guys are going to be some PPR monsters. And at prices of only $3,000 or $4,000, I definitely think they're going to be able to pay off value for you. So remember, pricing is pretty soft on DraftKings this year at the tight end spot. I wouldn't be opposed to using 2 tight ends, a second one in the flex when you get into your roster building for your bigger tournaments here. I think that I know that last week on the top roster that you could have made, there were 2 tight ends in Jenkins and Eifert, who were 2 of the best values. And they were on the ultimate roster for week 1 of NFL DFS at DraftKings. So going with the 2 tight end idea doesn't seem to be a horrible one, considering that the prices that you're able to get these guys at. So thank you guys for joining us here for our tight end video today. This is Ben Ricciardi signing off from RotoCurve. And as always, stay classy, DFS.